All right, so for the past several videos, I've been advancing a hypothetical argument about the nature of activism and the question of the prisoner's dilemma and how it relates to building socialism. So the argument basically it's lifted from the Endnotes Collective, an essay they published called Spontaneity, Mediation, and Rupture. And they don't use the term prisoner's dilemma. I think they actually might, but they phrase it more as the problem of coordinating the proletariat, the working class, and getting everybody on board with the same project. And the prisoner's dilemma. It's about lifting yourself up from a status quo where it is, irrational for particular agents to behave in the interests of the collective. It's a real interesting and like kind of problematic bind where agents are basically they must act irrationally in order to act rationally. But the thesis being argued here is that it is through the spontaneous, in the Kantian sense, meaning freely determined will of an individual to participate in a collective struggle that may be irrational in the terms of the present context, to lift themselves up out of the situation. And the role of the activist in that, and the activist, it's really just like a term that encompasses any kind of professional revolutionary, meaning activists in the traditional sense that we know them today, but we could also talk about things like a leftist organization in the same sense. But their role is not like to do what the Leninists think that the role of the Vanguard Party is, for example, which is about organizing and pushing forward and really like controlling the force of the proletariat. The role of the activists is, and the Revolutionary Party, it's more to act as like a historical medium, to transmit knowledge from one struggle to another, from one cycle of struggles to another. And it's really up to the spontaneous will of the proletariat to determine the form that struggles take. It is not for the activist to impose a predetermined or historically derived form upon ongoing or emergent workers' struggles. It's really up to the workers themselves to determine the form that struggles will take. So an example of this is the movie The Trial of the Chicago 7. It's a movie that came out maybe a month and a half ago, a bit dated. I saw it like when it came out. I could have done a more timely review back then, but so I'm going to spoil the movie. It doesn't fucking matter. The movie sucks. And it's also like based on historical phenomenon, so it really doesn't matter. I'm sorry. While I talk, I'm also going to go get my phone, which is buzzing, so I just don't want it to continue to do so. Anyway, basically, in that movie, you have these like really gratuitously shot scenes of these activists in the 60s who went to Chicago to participate in these anti-war demonstrations. And there are these scenes, like these really like central scenes to the entire film that are just so gratuitous and like disgustingly violent and like just very difficult to watch. Like I found myself really moved and like very deeply affected by these scenes. And I don't really mean that it's not like the filmmaker that did that, Aaron Sorkin. That's not really to his credit. It's more, it's just because I'm a fucking softie. Like when I watch videos of protesters getting decimated by police, I just find myself very moved, generally speaking. Anyway, so there are these scenes where you have like these huge crowds of protesters just getting brutally assaulted by these cops, like just smashed to pieces with their truncheons and like just disgustingly bludgeoned. It's like really horrifying war scenes of just like a bunch of hippies in like flip flops and whatever, um, just completely unprepared, not expecting the kind of brutal repression that came down on them from the Chicago Police Department. They're really horrifying scenes, and I don't. I mean, apparently, like I've read a lot about how misrepresentative this film was. In terms of like representing the actual character of the people who are on trial, particularly Abby Hoffman, and also just like completely erasing very significant aspects of the trial and like real historical things that happened. Like the ending, for example, is a total fucking like farce compared to what actually happened. But you know, setting that aside, like the scenes of these unprepared protesters getting brutally assaulted, compare that to the contemporary, where you have, like this summer, there was a huge wave of riots that swept across the United States. There are, massive riots in like basically every American city. It spread outside of the United States even, and you had like anti-police protests. They didn't. I mean, a few of them turned into riots here in Canada, but they're mostly protests. There's some looting in cities like Montreal, where you have like a pretty big cohort of professional rioters and like protesters. But like just think about some of the images that you've seen, like think about Portland, where they erected a temporary autonomous zone that lasted for like however many months, and there are all those videos of like just like profoundly equipped and prepared protesters clashing like in head on with police, as well as white nationalists and fascists who are out there to support the police. So you have like protesters like decked out in gas masks and helmets. They had like truncheons. They had homemade shields. They were acting like in unison, acting as like a real kind of militarized contingent. They were using tactics that had been innovated in Hong Kong, relating to like suppressing tear gas, for example, and dealing with all that sort of thing. Street medics were out in force. So there's a lot of preparation, and like compare these cinematographic scenes of these protesters just getting brutally eviscerated by cops who didn't even have guns. Like at least in this film, they're mostly depicted as wielding like truncheons, like blunt instruments, and just like smashing these hippies, and like blood gushing. It's really horrible. Anyway, so the point here, the interesting thing to think about is like that, like protesting tactics and like street tactics, workers' struggles tactics, and organization has like really progressed quite significantly from the 60s to the present, such that in the present there's like we're still like horribly disorganized as as the lefts. Like there's no party that represents us. There's no real kind of revolutionary organization. There's not even really like a good like electoral parliamentarian organization. And there's not much representation inside the government, whatever. There's no unity. There's very little organization. It's a pretty bad situation. But at least on the streets, there's been a lot of knowledge built up and acquired over the decades, such that you wouldn't really see protesters going out to protest police brutality and then getting completely taken by surprise. Maybe they do go out and get eviscerated, but it wouldn't be quite as surprising. There's a precedent for it, and it's really at their own peril that the workers are not prepared for that, that they don't account for that, and they don't have some kind of contingency, some kind of organized plan to deal with the violence that is inevitably going to be coming from the police and, the fascists who support the police. So, I mean, what is it that has caused workers' struggles to develop over the decades? It's not a organized group. There's no vanguard party that is responsible for that. And activists are disorganized. That's the nature of activists. They're maybe they are concentrated in a few organizations like the IWW or whatever NGO or whatever, but activism as such is a disunified kind of thing. It's like a bunch of people who are interested in a variety of causes, and they're not really there's no concerted activist effort to transmit historical knowledge and build up forces like that. So what explains the development over the decades? It's all of these activists, all of these disorganized forces acting as a historical medium, and the workers themselves choosing to participate in these struggles to continue the cycle of struggles, but having built up knowledge, having built up tactics such that the form of struggle is not just a bunch of hippies going out and getting eviscerated. It is now a bunch of a cohort, a cadre of organized activists, organized protesters who have equipped themselves and are prepared to face the consequences of going out and protesting police brutality coming from the police state that they live under. Anyway, I'll leave it at that, and I'll see you next time.